Hello, welcome to Pivotal Slice.
Yes, welcome to everyone, team, friends.
Slice heads.
Yep, we got some fresh ingredients.
Rolling out the pastry.
Yeah, yeah, some tasty little seasons.
What are we talking about today?
Well, that's a good question.
Short stories, isn't it?
Short stories, yes. We love short stories. Short stories are great.
Although, I have to say, I spoke to our guest today, and she has also written a novel, and we talked about other stuff as well. So, although the episode is called Short Stories, we cover a lot, and I think it's just a great conversation about making a career as a writer, and the kind of unique paths that you can take to get to that place.
Juicy. Succulent. So, on another note, what you been doing? Tell me.
Well, I've launched a new brand, a new intersectional feminist journal called Oranges, which I've mentioned before. And we've just closed our first period of submissions, so I've got just this amazing inbox stuffed with incredible writing from writers all over the world, and now I have the pleasure of going through it and selecting some pieces for publication and giving feedback as well, which, if you're subscribed to our Patreon, we've just released an episode all about feedback, so I go into a bit of detail in that about how to give good feedback and how to discern good feedback for your own work as well.
Awesome. Well done. Bravo.
Thank you. What about you?
I have just finished 12 new pieces. Feeling buzzing about that. Yeah, it's like 5 months work or something.
Great.
So I'm just mastering them at the moment with Alex from Debut Audio. So just doing sort of like final tweaks on the mixes, and he's just doing that like glossy layer of just making them sound incredible. So yeah, I'm just sort of scheduling some of them for release, and I'm going to be playing one at the end of the show, Embrace, which is going to be released soon. So yeah, if you're interested, then come and check my work out. David Mackenzie, composer, and Mackenzie spelled Mackenzie, and you know, David _ Mackenzie _ composer. So just super awesome.
Very exciting to have some fresh content ready to go out. That's a good feeling, isn't it, when the process is drawing to a close and you just got all this amazing work.
So exhilarating. Yeah, it's so good. Love it. Yeah, it's just like Christmas.
Yeah. So let's move on to the interview, shall we? This is a really good one, so hope you enjoy.
Irenosen Okojie is a writer of short stories and novels. Born in Nigeria and currently based in London. Her work is populated by bold, dreamlike imagery and complex characters, fusing surrealism, science fiction, mythology, horror, and dark comedy. Reading Irenosen's stories is like taking a trip directly through her subconscious mind. And she has cemented her reputation as a risk-taker in the landscape of contemporary fiction. She has published a novel and 2 short story collections, and her work is featured in the New York Times, The Guardian, BBC, and Huffington Post.
I just wanted to start, I guess, by just asking you about your background, and how and when you came to writing short stories and, longer stories as well.
Yeah, sure. Well, I've always been a really voracious reader from childhood. The first book I picked up was Roald Dahl's Fantastic Mr. Fox when I first moved to this country, and I just fell in love with reading and just kind of immersed myself from that point on. But I was really struck at the time as well by the complexity that he gave young people and young voices. And at that time, I think I was at a crossroads. I was 8 when I first moved to the UK. I went to boarding school in Norfolk, so I was kind of a fish out of water culturally, and I was trying to sort of find my way, I guess. So stories, whilst I was trying to make friends and adjust to my environment, there was something really comforting and hugely illuminating about the world of books. So yeah, from that point on, I was hooked and continued to make the effort to read. I had a diary as well at the time, and I journaled pretty prolifically, actually. And it was a great way, I think, of making sense of, the environment and the people. And I had a huge curiosity about other people, the ways they lived, the way people connected to each other. Even from that age, I was sort of fascinated by it all. So I was writing from that point, and writing, it became a sort of thread in my life. Even at university, I studied law, very different to what I do now. But at the time, I thought I would go into law because I loved a good argument, and I had an interest in the law as well. But even at that point, stories were always bubbling underneath. They were all around me, and I was writing poems. I was writing sort of mini plays, and I was writing essays. So I was always writing in some way. And then when I left university, it was a tricky period because I think that experience cocoons you in a way, and coming out into the outside world, trying to find work was really difficult because I had quit my law degree, sort of 2 semesters in, because I felt like it wasn't for me in the end, typical creative. And I did a media degree that was an amalgamation of units, and actually quite a useless degree in the end. So I came out of that, and it was like, oh God, how do I get a job? What's going to happen? There was sort of a real fear there, but you muddle through and you find your way. And during that period, I started writing for a filmmakers magazine, a Black filmmakers magazine, which was great for me. It was like my start, in terms of writing pieces. And I would go to their festivals. I would interview filmmakers and producers, and I loved it. I loved being in that kind of creative world, talking to different voices, albeit in film, which I also have a huge passion for. And then I sort of found my way in the arts because the boyfriend I had at the time, he was really in the know in terms of arts organizations in London. And, he had a really good eye for exciting venues and venues that were, doing dynamic things. So through him, I connected with a spoken word organization called Apples and Snakes. And they program live performance poetry around the country. And it's at the time, it was the only one of its kind. Slam poetry in the US was really taking off. It became this sort of underground movement that just grew and grew and grew. And off the back of that, Apples and Snakes then formed. And it was just a really exciting period to be involved in the arts. And I started volunteering for them actually at first. And, through that, the director at the time really took a shining to me and said, well, why don't you come and work for us? And they then offered me a position, which I had to interview for. It's not like I just got it handed to me. I had to work for it, but I got it, sort of marketing events for them. And again, that was another, sort of portal to storytelling, which is brilliant for me to see, live performances. And I think that's why I really enjoy reading my work to people now. It was through being in that space and seeing how important performance is actually as well. If you're a writer, to be able to perform your work, I think is it's a way of holding an audience and can give the work a certain dimension. So anyway, I was at Apples and Snakes. I was working for them. That really opened my world up. And prior to that, I signed up with Spread the Word. They are a literature development agency based in London.
Yeah.
And they were at the time running, I think it was the first of its kind, a program called Flight, which was pairing up exciting young voices, creative voices, with established voices, you know, so writers, poets, playwrights. And you would be mentored for a year. And then at the end of it, you'd be part of an anthology, and then you get to perform at the South Bank as well. And you'd have a week at Arvon. So it was a really exciting package. And at the time, there wasn't really much like that around. So, you know, so I think I submitted on the deadline day, which is classic me, you know, shades of what I was like at university, submitting assignments at the last minute, but somehow doing all right. And, you know, I'd always been writing. So I thought, I don't know how I came across it or heard about it, but somehow I did. And I thought, I'm gonna apply for this. So I just did it like off the cuff. It was a deadline, submitted for it, and luckily I got selected. That really, I think, started me on my journey. So, you know, Spread the Word and Apples and Snakes were crucial, I think, in terms of, you know, creating spaces for emerging voices to grow. So, but I have to say, I was somebody that I was really ambitious and not shy in terms of, I think there's something in just saying what you want, you know, approaching people. It's you'll be surprised that people will often say yes. You know, we were talking about this earlier, that if you just have the courage to say, I'm doing this, what do you think about it? I would love your take, and I would love to have a conversation about it. And often they want to, you know, be encouraging, and they want to support you. So I was often really good at, you know, just going to events, and not in a way that was natural. You know, you have to do and you have to genuinely gravitate towards people that interest you. You know, but because I was on that scene as part of my job, I would often have to go to you know, spoken word events or literature events to kind of find new talent. So I was very good at, you know, seeing someone, hearing their work, if it was really strong, or I felt some sort of connection to it, saying, hey, you know, let's have a coffee, or, you know, let's connect. And I found that helped me, you know, quite a bit throughout my career, just, being open to others, and sort of bringing people along with you, I think. And people did that for me, and that was very helpful. Right. So I also try to do that too. So that is a very long-winded answer to your question.
That's great. Wow, so much in there, so many tips. I agree. It's all about having the courage, isn't it, to make those connections. But I think for a lot of people, that can be the scariest part, just sort of standing up and saying, this is what I want, you know, this is what I need your help, kind of thing. Can be pretty terrifying if you're underconfident in any way, I think.
Yeah, definitely. And it's that thing of learning to give yourself permission, you know, and just thinking, oh, well, what's the worst thing that can happen? The worst thing that can happen is, okay, I might be a little bit embarrassed, but the best thing that could happen is they might say yes. Yeah. You know, so I would always tell myself that, because, of course, you know, I would get nervous as well, completely approaching people, or that I might make a fool out of myself. You know,
but so what, you know, and the more you do it, the more you take that risk, the easier it gets.
Exactly. The more you do it, the more confident you get in doing it, and eventually, and also I kind of had to learn to do it for my job, you know, because you couldn't be marketing events and be a shy person, right. You know, and you just couldn't do that, because you had to help get other voices out there. So you're not going to be much use to them if you're too shy about it, you know. So I think that training ground, working for Apples and Snakes, where you're sort of just thrown in the deep end, really, and you figure things out, that really helped me both professionally and, you know, in my own creative career as well. So it's a good learning ground.
So do you think that ambition, that drive developed as you kind of went along, or did you always have a strong ambitious sort of creative drive? I know you mentioned that you moved to this country when you were a child. So were you thinking then, I want to write books one day?
I wasn't thinking I want to write books one day then at that age. I was just thinking more, more, more. I was the kind of kid that would read 2 books in a day because, I was so invested in them. I just loved the world of literature. And to me, it felt like a kind of secret that you would be brought into all these different worlds. It felt like such a gift.
Yeah.
It makes you much more open-minded. It gives you access to different worlds and different experiences. It's so enriching. So for me, I always had a strong sense of that, and I was always responding to it. I was always sort of writing in response to it, but I didn't necessarily give myself permission to become, a short story writer or a novelist until I actually submitted for that Spread the Word program. It was then through the bubble that they created that because again, like I said, I felt seen by having a mentor, who reminded me of myself. And it was nice to be amongst other emerging voices, doing exciting things. And you felt like it was possible. So it kind of planted the seed. And then once you have that seed there and it's nourished, your ambition does develop, and I did think during that time, I could see myself maybe having a book out. Obviously it was very early on, and I knew there would be a long way to go and many drafts later. Goodness me, the multiple drafts, that is the other thing to get through. But that sort of set a fire under me, I think, being in that creative space, which is why it's so important to, I think, connect and create spaces where people are supportive of each other.
Yeah.
Because it means that you're seen, and you don't feel silly, feeling like I have this ambition that because sometimes it can be a secret thing for writers that we don't tell other people. And I remember feeling that like that for a long time. Like when I did realize I definitely want to be a writer, I remember feeling like, but I can't really say that to people until I become a writer.
Yeah.
And then halfway through that, do you know what I mean? It's a funny thing, isn't it? But I think halfway through that, I started speaking it into being as well. You kind of manifest it by saying it out loud. Yeah. And I started getting more, it's not that I would hit people over the head with it, but, like I said, when I started building up my career in the arts and attending things, and people would say, "Oh, what do you do?" I would say, "Oh, I'm a programmer at Apples and Snakes, but I'm also a writer." And that kind of gave me a little bit of confidence, like speaking it into being, and then connecting with people who would help facilitate that. I think that's, really important, because like we just touched on, it can be very scary when you have this vision to be a writer and you don't know how you're going to make it happen. You don't know how you're going to access that world. And also you're not sure how to give yourself permission for it. Yeah. But when you do have, say, I don't know, a mentor, or you're part of a program, or they're just somebody who you can show your work to, and they can read it and say, I see something in that. I cannot explain like how powerful that is, just for somebody to validate that dream. It really makes a world of difference. And then bit by bit by bit by bit, you start working on your craft, you read as much as possible, you attend workshops, you start to find your own voice as a writer. And I think that's how it happens. That's how that transition occurs.
Yeah, no, I really resonate with what you just said about, when people asked you what you did, because I had a similar thing for a long time. I'd be really scared of saying that I was a writer, because I just didn't really believe that it was possible, or, it just felt like a huge risk saying it out loud, just in case it doesn't go anywhere. So yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? It takes a while to really admit to yourself and to other people and be kind of proud of it,
Absolutely. And it is something to be proud of, you know.
Mm.
I always say that for me, I think that writing was like survival. Whether I got published or not, I will always write,
Mm.
you know. And I think in a way that kind of helped me along as well, because I thought, well, I was writing for myself. I have very complicated family life and, you know, a sister with health conditions who I love dearly, but also help look after. So there's been a lot of personal trauma there.
Yeah.
And for me, the writing was my space, you know?
Mm.
It was the space that I could channel everything into. It was the space that, you know, nobody can take that away from you, no matter what's happening,
Mm.
no matter whether or not, you know, you get that book deal. I just loved writing stories. I just had a passion for it. And it helped me, it helped me transition through difficulties in my life.
Mm.
And just making that conscious effort to carve that space for myself. It gave me a lot of quiet confidence, you know, regardless of whether anything was going to happen or not. You know, okay, I might have gotten some stories published, and then, you know, the book might not have happened, but there would still, I think, be a lot of joy in getting the stories published. You know,
Yeah.
whether it's in a journal or on a website, or, you know, just like as part of a small anthology, like whatever.
Mm.
Just that, it gives you satisfaction. And then off the back of that, you know, it's really interesting, I think, when you put work out there. It's like it gathers momentum, like you said. Once you start having the confidence to own the fact that this is what you want to do, and that, you know, everybody has a unique perspective, I think.
Mm.
You know, your way of looking at the world, no one else has that. Like, yeah, there may be some variance in it, but it's specific to you. And I always say, why shouldn't you have space? You know, just because somebody else is published doesn't necessarily mean that means that you can't have that space, you know? And I think there is that kind of gap there where people think, oh, you know, published writers, they must have just been born amazing and they deserve that space. No, those people, a lot of them had to work very, very hard to get there as well. And, you know, it's a process. The thing to remember is that they also had those trials and tribulations. They also got rejected many, many times. You know, I remember when I was submitting for stuff and I would get rejections when we would submit the novel or the collection. Like it sounds like a funny thing, but it was heartening to read about other established writers who'd gone through the same thing.
Yeah.
You know, who'd been rejected 100 and something times. I can't remember which writer it was, but there was one writer who, I mean, I was like, my goodness, the tenacity to keep going after you've been rejected like over 100 times. It is astonishing. You know, it's just
be really
remarkable.
resilient.
But yeah, I'm just like, that person is, and I was moaning about being rejected over 20, you know, and I was like, oh my God, it's so difficult. And it is, you absolutely have you know, that anger is valid. It's righteous, you know, but it's just, I think it's helpful to know that it's not easy for other people as well. Sure. You know, obviously some people have the dream experience of, you know, they come out of UEA or something and they sign with an agent. I have writer friends that attended UEA and they're all doing well. There's something about that university and that program that seems to just bring them out. I mean, it's great if you go there, I think. But for those of us who, you know, at the time I couldn't afford to do a UEA, you know, I really had to just graft and find my way. Like I said, I came up sort of grassrootsy. And actually, I'm really proud of that because I think it makes me an interesting writer. You know, Absolutely. It means that, you know, things didn't come easy for me. And, you know, all of that goes into the work as well. It's, you know, I'm sure with your writing, it's a similar thing. It's like the things that are difficult are also what make you interesting. The things that make you feel, oh my God, you know, that make you question, is this a space for me? Like you can turn all of that around. You know what I mean? It becomes it becomes your power. That's how I see it, So, for example, me, being at the time, being a young Black woman who writes experimental fiction, I was not what they were looking for on the scene. Like firstly, they weren't really taking risks on Black writers anyway. They were publishing very few. And then on top of it, they really didn't know what to make of my voice.
Yeah.
And, so it was like a double challenge to get published, which is why it's so great to have independent presses around, because I think they are taking risks. They're publishing very exciting voices. So there is a way to come through. It's just about finding that editor who gets what you're doing, who likes your voice, who wants to nurture it, who wants to give you space to be yourself, and that you don't have to compromise. When I think of, great women writers that I love who did that, you're talking about people like Bernardine Evaristo and the great Margaret Atwood as well, who I had the privilege of interviewing, which was a dream.
Wow.
She read Nudibranch. I walked in and she was holding the collection, and then she proceeded to talk to me about specific stories. It was an absolute shock to the system, but also, what generosity, what kindness, and similar with Bernardine as well. Bernardine has kind of been like my fairy godmother in literature for years. I met her years ago when I attended one of her events. Again, that thing of being bolshy and going up to somebody at the end, which is what I did. And, I went up to her. I was like, oh my God, do I do it? Do I do it? And I said, I'm going to do it. So I was like, right, I'm going to go up to Bernardine Evaristo and ask if she would like to meet for coffee one day. And, got chatting, and I said, oh, I really love the book, and I really love what you had to say, and it would be great if we could connect again. And she said yes.
Wow.
And this was years ago. And she gave me her email address. And then we just stayed in touch from that point. She would always champion me and be very encouraging. And, we would meet every now and again for coffee, just very, very kind. And this is what I mean by finding, you gravitate. You will know when you meet them as well. There'll be an openness there. There'll be a willingness there to uplift other people. And I always really like artists that are like that have a sense of community.
Yeah.
Because I think, it's so important. Yeah. Like we said, it's really hard to make your way. And if you don't have those people that kind of let you in or show you how it's done or, give you advice, it feels like such a closed off world. It's really, really difficult.
Yeah. Kind of feels like
I think those people
just in competition with each other, and then it just becomes a really sort of cold experience.
Exactly, and you don't want it to be like that. I enjoy other writers, and I like to encourage them, and I like to support them as well. And there's no reason why it can't be like that. Of course, there is inevitably that very competitive element, and you will encounter that. You will encounter people who can be mean to you in the space. I've certainly had that. For no reason except competitiveness, which is a real shame. But that, when I encounter that, I'm very quick at assessing. Obviously I'm a writer, so hopefully good at making sense of the human experience and sort of seeing through that, and also recognizing that there might be an insecurity there as well from that individual for whatever reason, and it's just about sort of approaching it with kindness, and you know what I mean? And
just having empathy, because I think there's just so much self-doubt in the writing world, isn't there? So many writers are just underconfident in what they're doing, so it just manifests maybe as that insecurity.
Yeah, and I think it can be crippling sometimes for people too. And we talked about writers being quite shy. It's a real thing. It's hard enough, I think, to get your work up to a certain standard, and then you're expected to promote it as well. And if you're, a lot of writers find that very, very difficult. They just want to get the work out and just be done with it. They don't want to do, I like the whole, engaging with audiences aspect. I find that really interesting, and it's really fascinating to see, how people interpret the work. And it can be very encouraging as a writer, but it wasn't always like that. I had to work my way towards that kind of confidence.
Yeah.
So, I have complete empathy and, kindness towards the fact that it can be very, very tricky to navigate that aspect. But yeah, again, it's like we said, the more you do it, the more confident you become at doing it. And the more you can sort of appreciate the benefits of that.
So was it kind of a relief then to go to short stories after agonizing over the novel for such a long time?
Yeah, because it was, so it's really interesting. I knew I needed to just get out of my head with the novel, but I wanted to keep writing, but not on the novel. So I picked up a collection of stories that I'd had for 7 years. I'd never read it. Tiny collection called Jesus' Son by Dennis Johnson.
Okay.
It's incredible and still my favorite collection ever. I mean, I don't think any other collection tops it, but there are many, many wonderful collections. But I picked it up, and it's a collection about a drug addict on the fringes, and they're interconnected short stories that bring you into his world. But what I was struck by was not only the writing was incredible, but the freewheeling nature of it, but it was the empathy that he was able to create for this character. This is a person that you're not supposed to care about, but he made you fall in, he made you have this empathy for this man. He brought you into his world. He gave him this kind of internal richness that it was just brilliant. And I didn't know that the short form could do that at the time. I had no idea that short story could make you feel that invested, in the way that novels could, because with a novel, you would stay with a character over periods of time, and, you would really be invested and connected. Whereas I think that was what had made me avoid picking up short stories for a long time, because I just couldn't see how it would be the same kind of enriching experience. But when I picked up that collection, and it's so fascinating that I had that in my possession for 7 years, and it's insane because it blew my mind, that collection. It basically solidified for me the direction that I wanted to go in as a writer, in terms of taking risks. In terms of being bold, in terms of writing very complicated female characters in particular, and especially complicated Black female characters, and women of color who are not given that nuance often, and interesting. I mean, Dennis Johnson is a white American man, but there was something in the way that he was able to capture with this character's world. It was inclusive, it was strange, it was dark, it was kind of compelling, and I was just blown away by what he did, and that really fueled me in excitement about what was possible with the short form. So then I started writing what then became my collection, Speak Gargantula. I wrote the first piece, which was Gunk, which is really a rant from a mother's perspective about her son, who is struggling with mental health issues, and sort of unraveling in a way that's really quite painful. But the way she approaches it is there is some compassion there, but there's a real sort of anger there as well. and it's a complicated piece. So that was the first piece I wrote, and already I kind of had that permission to play with form, because this was not, a standard story in terms of getting an arc. It was galvanizing in a way. Like I said, it was like a speech.
Yeah.
And from that, I just, I had other ideas while I was writing it. I had other ways to think about form and stretching it and bending it, and ideas like trying to push in terms of, what could potentially be a story. How could I make an idea really become fully formed within the short form? And how could I showcase my voice in a way that felt really authentic and distinctive? And it was through writing short stories that got cemented for me, the sort of writer that I wanted to be. I mean, it was there in the novel, but I think with Speak Gigantular, it was like, okay, you are somebody that wants to be subversive, that wants to kind of, push the boundaries of form and ideas, and that's okay. Like, the problem was I was looking for sort of Black representation of that, and Black British representation of that, and we weren't really given the space to do that.
Yeah.
So that was the thing that made it difficult. It's like, while I was having this joy of getting to know myself as a writer, I was, there was at the back of my mind that worry, like, would it get published? Will I find an editor that will get it and will understand it and will be brave enough to publish it, So there were all these things at play, but in the meantime, it meant that I kept writing. And in the meantime, it meant that I just felt really invigorated in a way that was very, very exciting. And it was from writing that collection, from writing Speak Gigantular, I then went back to Butterfly Fish, the novel, and I was able to face it again. because you learn tricks from writing the short form. You have to create an immersive world that holds the reader, because they could get distracted by, there might be a TV show or a theatre show that they want to go and see, So you're jostling for space, really. But I think with short stories, they have to be quite compelling to really hold the reader's attention. So it was just a joy to be able to learn those things. And then I thought, okay, how I'm going to approach this novel is I'm going to see each chapter as a short story, as a series of, and that was how I got my head around fixing it. It was doing a Jedi mind trick on myself.
That's a great trick.
Yeah, that I was writing a series of connected shorts because I was intimidated by the novel form. Even though I had written a draft of it, I was I was still like, oh God, what do I do with this? How do I fix the problem? And with the novel, you change one thing, there's a ripple effect. You've got to go back to chapter 2 to fix that thing. And oh my goodness, it's just stressful.
It's a nightmare, isn't it? I have a very similar feeling about, novels can just be so overwhelming. Whereas like when I sit down to write a short story, I just feel a certain sense of freedom that I don't really feel with a novel, because it's just less overwhelming. You just kind of feel a bit more like you can do anything with the short form. Do you feel that way too? Or
absolutely, you've nailed it on the head. It's that, and that's what it gave me, that sense of like a liberation, this real freedom, like you said, to just play. And I find that the way I write short stories is very different to when I'm writing a novel. Like, I am obsessed when I'm writing a short story. Like, it's just, it's such a feverish process for me. Like, I literally will write one in the space of a month, just going, because I'm so excited about the idea. And then while I'm doing that, another idea has formed. So I found it to be a really fruitful process. And like you said, there's just the freedom in it. You can do anything. You can write a short story that's like a series of postcards. I think Carmen Maria Machado did that in her collection. And I was like, this is really cool. Like the way she it was just like little elliptical pieces that connected and somehow formed this expansive piece. And again, it just showcased what you can do with the short form, that you can kind of do anything with it. So yeah, it's important to find, I think, ways to make you excited about writing. It could be that it's flash fiction. Some people really like flash fiction. It could be that. It could be that it's short stories. It could be that it's novels. It could be all three. I like both the short form and the long form. They're different, and I feel like I almost use like different parts of my brain in how I approach them. I don't know. It's an interesting experience.
Yeah, I mean, the word that you just used, feverish, I really like that, because I feel the same way about short stories. It's almost like a short story is sort of like a short love affair, and it's very feverish. It really gets inside you. But a novel is maybe more like a long relationship where you have to get to know it more deeply, and the good and the bad parts, and kind of.
I love your description of it. I'm going to use that. It's perfect. It really is. It is like an obsessive love affair, though, isn't it? It gets into your marrow. It gets into your bones, and you just can't shake it. You're walking around with it in your head everywhere. And like you said, the novel is different to that. It's like, okay, this is for the long haul. Okay, I'm going to take my time getting to know you. It's a slightly different approach, but what a fantastic way of describing it. A love affair. I love that.
There are good and bad parts to both, I guess.
No, that's true.
So with your short stories, do you do a lot of planning, or do you just sit down and pour it out onto the page?
I'm definitely a sit down and pour it out onto the page person. I mean, I have a very loose idea I have an idea, because it always starts off with an idea or an image for me. If it's an image, I'm like, oh, how do I create a context around that? How do I create a world around that? And if it's an idea, it's usually the excitement of making it fully formed. So it's loose for me, and then I just jump right in. I think I'm kind of an instinctive writer, in the sense that it's different for everybody. I personally don't like to plan too much, just because I feel like I love that fluidity. I love the things that are going to come to me that I don't know about yet. I prefer it that way. So David Lynch, one of my favorite directors, refers to it as goldfish. You've got to let the goldfish come to you, but you've got to be in position for them to appear. So I kind of always approach writing as a very humbly, actually, as a process of investigation. So, for example, with Butterfly Fish, I was looking at in the modern day aspect of the story, I was looking at a young woman who was struggling with mental health issues and grappling with the loss of her mother, but also this huge family secret that she was about to discover through inheriting her grandfather's diary. And for me, it was like, how do I explore all of that in ways that feel fresh, but also authentic, and how do I do it in a way that isn't kind of stigmatizing, mental health or diminishing it. It was really important to be able to write something that can help the conversation. I think particularly in Afro-Caribbean communities, where we still need to do a lot of talking about these issues. And there is some way to go around how we talk about it, and being more open, and that taking the shame away from it, really, because that's the thing. It's like, the more it's out in the open and the more we talk about it, the less people feel ashamed or embarrassed about having these experiences. So it was looking at that, but also writing about, being a young Black woman in London and what that feels like, and incorporating all of my experiences into it. And it's that thing I said to you, when I look at Butterfly Fish now, I see a lot of my experience in London in it. And that makes sense to me. You do you do write about yourself, and at the time when I was doing it, I didn't see it that way. It's so funny. I thought that there was a bit of distance, and there probably is, but it was just interesting to sort of look back at that part of the novel in particular and go, oh, okay, this is very the kind of thing that I went through. These spaces are spaces that were striking to me for whatever reason, and felt like it would be important to incorporate it to sort of help create that lived experience. So yeah, there's a lot about like space in that book, but yeah, overall I think similarly with that, I didn't really plan too much. I had the idea. Each chapter, I would take each chapter as it comes, but also trying to make sure that the characters evolved. Because that's important. You have to have some tension. You have to have some kind of an arc. I hesitate to use the word journey, but but it really does reflect what needs to happen.
Yeah.
You can't get away from that. There has to be some kind of conflict and resolution. So yeah, sort of bear all that in mind whenever I'm writing. Like, what does the character want? What gets in their way, and how do they get around it? So I think if that's playing at the back of your mind, even if you don't have detailed structures, detailed plotting, that's okay. I have writer friends who plot and plan very particularly and specifically. Like, they will have a breakdown of each chapter. And that's great for them, because they know exactly what's going to happen. They know exactly what points they need to hit. They know how it's going to reverberate down to chapter 24, the impact of chapter 2. And that's great. That's almost like an architectural way of approaching it, and that's fascinating. But I think whatever process, whereas I'm the complete opposite to that. So however your process is, I think it's about understanding what it is, and I think it's about accepting what it is and then committing to that. So there would be no point for me. It would get in my way if I was the way I am, but then beating myself up about the way I am as a writer. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like looking at somebody else who's much more forensic in the way they approach planning. And feeling bad that I'm less so. But I don't do that because I think, it might make my writing slightly different if I did it that way, And so it's about understanding what your strengths are, and taking learning from other writers, but not necessarily adopting everything blindly, because you got to figure out what works for you.
Yeah. And I think when you're writing stuff that's really, quite surreal, like what you're writing, you do have to have more of an intuitive kind of process. And it's interesting that you mentioned David Lynch. I'm a huge fan of him as well.
Oh my God, he's incredible.
And I've watched his masterclass. I don't know if you've ever watched that, but basically the way he writes a script is to just get 70 like cards and just write out 70 different scenes and put them all together, and it's like nothing to do with really building a structure or anything like that.
That's brilliant. That sounds very Lynchian, actually.
So I mean, your work, it just feels so like you're really connected to your intuition and your like subconscious mind. So do you really think about that, like channeling that when you're writing? And how do you access those really deep parts of yourself to get this kind of surreal material?
That's a great question. For me, it's in interestingly enough, it's in the time that I write. That's how I think it happens. So it's two things. I write very early in the mornings, so usually about 6:30, 7 a.m. And I'm sort of half awake, half asleep when I write, and that's deliberate.
Right.
Because that exactly what you just said, it means that I can tap into that very sort of dreamy area of my subconscious where things are not quite defined yet. The day is not quite defined yet. The world is still asleep. Yet, my subconscious is kind of bubbling away, and it's about tapping into that early enough without any disruption, and almost like free writing, to be honest with you. almost like a free writing practice, I would say,
Yeah.
and then letting whatever is there come out. That's my approach. But I also think I have, like I said to you earlier, a real interest in poetry.
Mm.
And, you know, I always advise people, if you want to, I mean, not everybody takes it seriously, but for me, it certainly worked. You know, if you want to be a really interesting writer, read poetry. You know, if you want to understand how you play with language, read poetry. Obviously, you read fiction as well, but I think there's something in, for me, the poetic, the fact that you have to do so much with such a, a kind of short framework. It's like short stories.
Yeah.
You know, you're doing a lot with a little, and somehow that means your arsenal gets stronger. You know what I mean? So that's what I get from that space, and obviously experiencing live poetry as well. Good live poetry was also helpful, and this is why I like to play with language. You know, this is why I like to push it and bend it and see how I can sort of, create a dynamic sentence that stops the reader in their tracks, that they want to come back to, or an image that they think, God, that's really interesting, that somehow that's an image, but yet it's an image within an image within an image.
Yeah.
and that's through love of language, that's through mining poetry. My favorite poet ever is June Jordan, a Black American poet who died, but was just almost virtuosic in her approach, writing about Blackness and the politics of that, but also in a way that was both bold and experimental and political all at once. But she also just wrote bloody good poetry, and that kind of commitment to the craft, it just really, really impressed me. So when I was writing Butterfly Fish and Speak Gigantula, I would read like a couple of June Jordan poems a day. I would read that in the mornings, and then I would go to the page to write, because it's like, again, giving yourself permission to be in that space, to kind of own the sort of voice that you want to have. And you get signs and you get encouragement from doing this. And that was how I figured the process out. For me, it was that combination of the time that I write, the sort of work I want to do. How do I foster the environment to create that? How do I give myself permission to create that? And it was about feeding and nurturing all of it, in a way, but also being confident enough to say, okay, this is what I want to do. If I want to write this kind of playful, surreal stuff, I've got to be in the mind frame for it. I can't be doing it in the middle of the day where I'm stressed out about this person hasn't gotten back to me about an invoice. I'm chasing this. There are things happening. For me, it doesn't lend itself well. I can write in the evenings I can do it, and I have done it when I needed to. And I do also, I should say, actually, this is really important. One of the ways I keep that going is I write like miniature prose poems every day.
Okay.
So I write about 10 of those a day. So I have like loads of little like diaries with those pieces. I'd never show people, but they're part of my practice. And they're also connected to writing that kind of surreal, creating those sort of landscapes. And it's not that I do anything with them, but it just helps me keep that practice. And they, half of them don't make any sense, but but it's just fun. It's just fun. I'm not going to show them to anybody, but it's keeping me tethered to that world. So even if I'm, even in the periods where I'm not working on a novel, or I'm going through a fallow period where, I suffer from something called writer's fear. I have those periods where I suddenly get scared of the page.
Yeah.
We all have our own sort of version of that. Some people call it writer's block. In my case, I call it writer's fear. But throughout that, I'm always writing these weird little prose poems that make absolutely no sense. And somehow feeling connected to that means that I remind myself that I can still do it. Do you know what I mean? When I
Yeah.
overcome the fear, I just have to pick up those diaries, look at the piece, those little miniature pieces, and go, oh, okay, that line is not bad. And that line in that, you know what I mean? You just remind yourself that you can do it.
I really enjoyed that. Well done.
Yeah, me too. Thank you to Irenosen for coming on the show, and she was just so kind and open, and I really love what she said about building a community and how important that is to self-development as an artist, and I think that's definitely what we're trying to do with this podcast. So yeah, thank you for her wisdom.
Yeah, very appropriate, and some real sort of juicy nugs in there to suckle down on.
Not sure about that.
So thank you for being here with us on the show. It's always just lots of fun making these, and if you want to connect with us further, then come onto our Patreon page. We got some new fresh episodes up on there that's building up incredibly well.
And you can suggest topics for episodes as well, and be part of our community and our mission. So we'd love to have you. You can also follow us on social media. We're on Instagram, just Pivotal Slice. So come on there and connect with us.
Yeah, we're thinking about doing a show which involves people on the Patreon, like submitting some audio over a subject or something that we've been talking about for a while, and doing a sort of like collage episode of like audio like submitted from people on the channel who are talking about a certain subject, something like that. We haven't completed the sketch yet, but something interactive where we can get the audience on the show basically.
Yeah, we're all about that, and collaborative. We want you to be a part of it as well, rather than us just sitting here talking your ears off.
Exactly. We love to do that, but you know, there's other dimensions to explore. So huge love. Be good to yourselves. Love yourselves. You are amazing. You are divine. No one has ever existed that is you, and no one will ever exist that is you. You are divine.
Yeah, and we believe in you.
We do.
Wholeheartedly.